There comes a moment, and I believe many of you have already had it, or you would not be here tonight, when something inside you quietly refuses to accept the life that has been handed to you. Not with bitterness, not with rebellion, with something far quieter and far more powerful than either of those. A simple, unargued inner knowing that what you are living is not the whole of what you are. That the person the world has been calling by your name, the person defined by your history and your circumstances and other people's expectations, that person is real but not complete. That there is something beneath it, something older and larger and more fundamental than any story that has been told about you. And that this something has been stirring and growing and pressing toward the surface for longer than you perhaps know how to say. Tonight I want to speak directly to that knowing, not to flatter it, not to inflate it with promises that cost nothing to make. I want to speak to it with the precision and the respect it deserves, because what is stirring in you is not a mood, not an ambition, not a passing restlessness. It is the beginning of what I can only call an awakening. And an awakening, when it is genuine, changes not just what you want or what you believe or how you feel. It changes the fundamental ground from which you live. It changes what you understand yourself to be. That is what I want to address tonight. Not the techniques of manifestation, though I will touch on them. Not the mechanics of assumption, though those underlie everything I will say. The deeper question, the one that everything else depends on. Who are you, actually? And what becomes possible the moment you answer that question correctly? I want to begin with something that I know has marked the lives of many of you, and that has been, for most of you, a source of confusion, even of quiet pain, the difficulty, the extended difficulty. Not the ordinary friction that everyone encounters, but the particular, sometimes prolonged, sometimes isolating, sometimes bewildering difficulty that seems disproportionate, that seems to single you out in ways that do not appear to single out others. The rejection that came precisely when you needed acceptance. The door that closed at the moment you most needed it to open. The period of silence when everything you reached toward seemed to recede and the world seemed to have no place for what you were trying to become. If you have lived through something like this, and I believe many of you have, you will have asked the question that everyone in that position eventually asks. Why me? I want to answer that question tonight. Not with consolation, not with the soothing suggestion that everything happens for a reason, but with something precise enough to actually be useful. Gold is not made in comfortable conditions. It is made in fire. The fire does not create the gold. The gold was always there, latent in the ore. But the fire does something that no gentler process can accomplish. It burns away everything that is not gold, until what remains is only and entirely itself, pure, unalloyed, unmistakable. The difficulty in your life has been that fire, not as punishment, implies that something is being taken from you. What the fire does is the opposite. It removes what was never yours to begin with. The false identities accumulated through years of being told who you are by people who could only see the surface of you. The limitations absorbed from environments that could not conceive of what you were capable of. The habits of smallness developed as a kind of protection in circumstances that seemed to require it. The doubts about your own worth, your own vision, your own capacity. All of it, the accumulated dross of a life lived in a world that did not fully see you. The fire burns it away, not to destroy you, to reveal you, to strip the ore down to what it actually is, beneath everything it was mistaken for. This is what the long difficulty was doing. This is what the rejection and the isolation and the long nights of questioning were accomplishing, whether you knew it or not, whether you consented to it or not. They were the refining process. And you are here tonight. You have arrived at this moment, not in spite of them, but through them. Not damaged by them, but, in the deepest and most literal sense, made by them. The question is not why the testing happened. The question is what you are willing to understand yourself to be, now that the testing is substantially done. Let me now address the central error, the one that all the difficulty was designed to correct, and the one that most people, even after extraordinary testing, continue to make. The error is this. You have been identifying yourself with your history. I do not mean that you have been thinking consciously about your past. I mean something deeper. I mean that the self you wake up as each morning, the self that encounters the day, that responds to events, that carries certain expectations about what will and will not happen to it, that self has been constructed primarily from the accumulated record of what has already occurred, what you have tried and how it went, what others told you about your capacities and your worth, what your circumstances have consistently suggested about your place in the order of things. This constructed self is real, in the sense that it operates and makes decisions and feels things, but it is not fundamental. It is a story. And the crucial thing about a story is that it can be revised. Here is what I have taught throughout my work and what tonight's theme brings me back to again. You are not the sum of what has happened to you. You are the consciousness in which everything that has happened to you has occurred. You are the awareness, the I am, that was present for all of it, that registered all of it, that can remember all of it, but that is not made of any of it. Consciousness is not constructed from its contents. It contains its contents. And what contains something is always larger than and fundamentally different from what it contains. You are that, the awareness, the I am. And the I am in its own nature is not limited, not defined, not circumscribed by any history whatsoever. It is pure creative potential. It is the power by which, as scripture says, all things were made, not a portion of that power, not a channel through which it flows on good days. The thing itself, looking out through your particular eyes, living through your particular life, but in its essence identical with the creative intelligence at the foundation of all existence. Now, and this is where I want you to be very precise with yourself. Most people understand this as a pleasant spiritual idea without actually living from it. They agree with it conceptually while continuing to operate from the limited history constructed identity as the real and operative self. They hold the truth at arm's length, admiring it, even being moved by it, while the practical business of their daily lives is conducted entirely from the old address. What I am asking you to do tonight is something more radical than finding a new idea interesting. I am asking you to genuinely relocate, to move your operative center, the place from which you actually live and respond and create, from the constructed historical self to the awareness that underlies it, not as a permanent meditative state, not as a withdrawal from ordinary life, but as the actual ground of your practical daily existence. This is the awakening, not a feeling, not a peak experience, a change of address. And the reason it changes everything is that consciousness creates reality, not the thoughts of the surface mind, not the deliberate intentions of the ego, but the deep, settled, taken for granted sense of what is true, which is determined entirely by the identity from which you are operating. Change the identity, and you change what the universe, which is your own consciousness pushed out, is required to produce. There is something that happens in a genuine awakening that I want to name precisely because it is both its greatest gift and the thing that is sometimes experienced in the early stages as a kind of loss. You cannot go back, not in the nostalgic sense, not that you miss the old life and cannot return to it. In a more fundamental sense, once you have genuinely seen through the illusion of the limited history constructed self, that illusion never quite reassembles itself in the same way. It may reassert itself. Habit is powerful, and the patterns of the old identity have years of momentum behind them. But there is now permanently a place in you that knows the assertion is not the whole truth. A place that, even in the midst of the old pattern's insistence, can observe it and recognize it for what it is. A habit, not a fact. A story, not an identity. A shadow, not the light. This is the threshold you have crossed. And the reason you cannot fully return is not that the door behind you has closed. It is that the self that would return no longer fully exists. It has been too thoroughly seen. The fire has done its work. What this means practically is significant. And I want to be honest about both its challenge and its power. The challenge is this: the world around you has not changed yet. The people in your life, in many cases, still see the old you, the constructed historical self they have known. They will relate to you from that image Expect responses from you that the old self would have given, be confused or unsettled when you do not provide them. There will be relationships that feel suddenly ill fitting, environments that once felt like home and now feel foreign, conversations that seemed important and now seem to have nothing to do with where you actually are. Do not mistake this dissonance for a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the natural result of having moved to a new state of consciousness while the outer world is still reporting on the old one. The outer world is always the last to know. It will catch up, but it catches up to where you are, not to where you were, and in the interval, the discrepancy will sometimes be uncomfortable. The power is this: the new identity, once genuinely inhabited, does not require the outer world's confirmation to remain stable. This is the essential difference between the awakened and the unawakened approach to life. The unawakened person is dependent on outer confirmation to maintain their sense of self. They need the outer world to behave in certain ways in order to feel certain ways about themselves. The awakened person knows that the outer world is the product of the inner state, not its source, and therefore the inner state does not waver when the outer world contradicts it. It remains settled, steady, and in that steadiness it continues to create. This is why the chosen, to use the language of the scripture, always seem to the world around them like people of inexplicable confidence, not arrogance, not performance, the genuine quiet steadiness of one who no longer requires external confirmation of something they already know to be true. Let me now speak about what actually happens in practical terms when a person genuinely shifts their operative identity from the limited historical self to the underlying, the I am. That is the actual creative power. The first thing that changes is your reactions. I have spoken about this in other lectures, but it bears repeating here because it is the most reliable indicator available to you of where you actually are. Not where you think you are, not where you intend to be, where you actually operatively, functionally are. When something goes wrong, when a circumstance arises that contradicts what you want, when evidence accumulates against your desire, when someone doubts you or dismisses you or acts in a way that would, from the old identity, feel confirming of the old limitations, how do you react? Automatically, before you can choose, before the considered conscious response arrives. What is the first spontaneous, unconsidered movement of your inner life? If it is fear or defensive anger or the familiar heaviness of one who has just been reminded of their limitations, you are still operating primarily from the old identity. This is not failure or condemnation. It is information. It tells you where the center of gravity still lies, and therefore where the work still needs to occur. If it is a settled, curious, almost detached recognition, that is the old story asserting itself. It does not define me. I know who I am. Then you are beginning to operate from the new one. Not perfectly, not without the old patterns occasionally surfacing. But the center of gravity has shifted, and that is what matters. The second thing that changes is your inner conversations. By this I mean the constant, mostly unmonitored stream of self talk that runs beneath the surface of your conscious life, the automatic commentary your mind provides on everything you encounter, including yourself. From the old identity, this commentary is largely organized around confirmation of the old assumptions. This is hard, this is unlikely, this is not for someone like me. Things usually go wrong at this point. It is not usually dramatic or loud. It is the quiet, taken for granted background hum of a mind that has been conditioned to expect certain things and keeps confirming that expectation. From the new identity, from the I am that knows itself to be the creative power rather than its victim, the inner conversation changes. Not because you are consciously monitoring and correcting every thought, but because the state from which thought arises has changed. The new state produces different thoughts naturally, the way soil produces different plants. The background hum becomes one of sufficiency rather than lack, of expectancy rather than apprehension, of course rather than if only. And the outer world, which is your consciousness pushed out, which has no agenda of its own, which is simply and always the faithful mirror of what is held as true in the depths. The outer world begins, gradually and then with increasing momentum, to reorganize itself to match the new inner state. People behave differently toward you. Opportunities become visible that were always present but invisible to the old perception. Circumstances shift in ways that the rational mind cannot always trace back to any deliberate action. The world adjusts to your new frequency. This is not magic. This is the law, operating precisely as it always operates, now reflecting a different inner reality than it reflected before. There is one thing remaining that I must address, because it is the specific place where people who have genuinely understood everything I have described still sometimes pause, and in pausing, delay what is already theirs. They wait for confirmation. They have made the inner shift. They have relocated their identity, at least substantially, to the new state. They have changed their inner conversations, watched their reactions improve, felt the genuine shift in the quality of their inner life. And then they wait, consciously or not, for the outer world to confirm that the shift is real before they proceed to live fully from it. This waiting is the last remnant of the old habit. The old identity needed outer confirmation because it did not trust the inner. The new identity does not need outer confirmation because it understands that the inner is the cause and the outer is the effect, and that causes do not wait for their effects to appear before being real. The seed does not wait for the fruit to appear before it begins growing. The fruit is the confirmation of the seed, not its cause. And the seed that spends its energy looking for the fruit before it has grown is a seed that has misunderstood the direction of the process. You are the seed. The new identity, the I am, the creative consciousness, the awareness that knows itself to be the power and not its product, that is the cause. The outer conditions that will increasingly reflect it are the effect. And effects follow causes. They cannot help but follow causes. It is the law. So do not wait. Do not pause at the threshold, looking for signs that it is safe to cross. The crossing is the work. The crossing is, in fact, the manifestation. Because the moment you genuinely cross, in consciousness, into the state of the wish fulfilled, into the identity of one for whom the desired reality is simply and ordinarily true, you have planted the seed that the law must grow. Move now, not with forced confidence or performed certainty, with the quiet, settled, entirely unspectacular normality of someone who knows what they know. Carry yourself as one for whom the outcome is not in question, not because you are suppressing doubt, but because the state you are occupying does not contain the doubt. It has been replaced, not suppressed. The new identity does not require the old fears in order to function. It is simply free of them, the way a room is free of darkness when the light is on. This is your inheritance. Not something to be earned or deserved or waited for. Something to be claimed right now in the privacy of your own consciousness, in the simple and revolutionary act of accepting as true what has always been true about who you actually are. I want to leave you tonight not with an instruction, but with a recognition. Something I want you to receive not as information, but as memory, as the remembering of something you already knew and had for a time been persuaded to forget. You are not the sum of what has happened to you. You never were. You are not the limitations that were placed on you by circumstance or by other people's inability to see you clearly. You were never those limitations, even when you wore them. You are not the fears that conditioned you, the doubts that were installed in you, the smallness that the world sometimes requires of people in order to feel comfortable around them. You are the awareness in which all of that occurred, the I am, the creative consciousness, the power by which worlds are made, looking out through your specific eyes, living through your specific life, with its specific history and its specific challenges, but in its own nature, beneath and beyond all of that, entirely free, entirely capable, entirely already what it needs to be. The testing was real, the difficulty was real, the fire was genuinely hot. But what the fire was burning away was never you. It was everything that was not you. Every false layer, every borrowed limitation, every assumption about yourself that someone else's consciousness planted in yours before you knew how to examine what you were receiving. What remains after the fire is what was always there, the gold, the unalloyed, unmistakable, undestroyable truth of who you are. The door that is open before you is not a new door. It is the door you were always meant to walk through. You have simply been prepared by everything you have lived to finally recognize it and to know, not hope, not believe, but know that you are precisely the person it was built for. The world is waiting for what you are going to do with that knowledge, not in judgment, in anticipation, because the universe, which is your own consciousness made visible, has been faithfully reflecting everything you have assumed about yourself. And when the assumption changes, when you step fully into the identity of what you actually are and begin to live from it without apology and without waiting for permission, the reflection will change with it. It cannot do otherwise. It is the law. And the law, as I have said many, never fails. The preparation is complete, the door is open. What comes next is entirely and only yours to create. This is Neville Lectures. I'll see you again in the next video.